All right, everyone, let's get the show started. Welcome to our DevOps office hours. It's July 28th, 2021. My name is Eric Osterman, and I'll be leading the conversation. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We're a DevOps accelerator, and that means that we help companies own their infrastructure in record time by building it together with your team while showing them the ropes. So if that sounds interesting, head over to cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. Again, that's cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. For those of you new to the call, the format is very informal. My goal is to get your questions answered. So feel free to unmute yourself at any time if you want to jump in and participate. If you're tuning in from our podcast or YouTube channel, you can register for these live and interactive sessions by going to cloudposse.com/officehours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/officehours. We host these calls every week. We'll automatically post a video recording of this session to our YouTube channel. So if you enjoy the content and want to support it, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. So let's see what announcements we have in store for you today. So not too many. One that I want to announce is, so last week we had an awesome presentation about the Waypoint product. Taylor Dolezal joined us from HashiCorp, gave a demo of how that works. It still seems kind of early in its development, but I'm excited that HashiCorp is putting together a tool to improve the overall developer experience building and releasing software. So if you didn't catch that episode last week, head over to YouTube. Andy will share a link, I'm sure, where you can watch last week's demo of HashiCorp Waypoint. So on the 18th, so in a few weeks, we're going to do another demo. This is going to be on another new product from HashiCorp called Boundary. I've also been very excited about this. The whole zero trust remote access is a hot space. It's been dominated by a lot of expensive and enterprisey solutions. Boundary is a new entry in here, which is totally open source and supposedly pretty easy to get up and running with. Other news, I thought this was kind of interesting. Anybody who's met Mitchell Hashimoto knows that he's a very humble, approachable, friendly guy. And it's just really interesting that, he said, he, as the founder of HashiCorp, he just realized that, being CTO was necessary and good at the time, but now he really wants to get back into more hardcore engineering again. That's where his heart is. So he has stepped down as co-CTO, I guess was the position, and now he's just going to be a regular internal contributor individual contributor at HashiCorp. Anyone have any notes on that to add? All right. The other thing that I came across, if you haven't already subscribed to it, I do recommend checking it out. Anton is a prolific contributor of the whole, HashiCorp Terraform community. So if you haven't already subscribed, check out his newsletter. He also does a podcast as well on Terraform, another great resource. Go to weekly.tf and you can subscribe there. And that's where I get a lot of my inside track on what's going on. Speaking of which, I thought an interesting one that I saw was something that came up last year, end of December. We had all the taco providers on, the Terraform automation and collaboration software for Terraform online. And a question that came up was kind of, okay, great. So you have all these platforms that help you automate Terraform CI or CD, but who in the end is responsible for coming up with your policies? And there's really no company out there really helping with that as much as, well, perhaps maybe some individual products like TFSec or Chekhov. But here's a nice library of Conftest rules for Conftest, broken down by provider, so AWS and Azure, and broken down by all the various AWS services. So I thought that was looks like it hasn't received any additional love as of 2 months ago. So it was an initial upstreaming effort, but anyways, a nice resource for writing OPA for Terraform. And the other interesting utility, it's the Go utility. Makes it very easy to list the entire suite of AWS services on the command line. Obviously, you can use the AWS CLI for this, but this is a little bit more terse, a little bit easier to interact with using this tool. I also found it through Anton's newsletter, so just saying, check this out. Anyone else come across some cool tools in the past week or so? I know, Jonas, you were just telling me about something. You want to share that tool that you discovered?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I listen to so many podcasts, so I've got like tools coming out the ear, basically. I don't always get to try them out, but this one I actually did. I don't know how like productionized it is, but it's super easy to set up and it solves a very common use case, which is how the F do I just get basic debugging on Kubernetes clusters, especially if you're new to Kubernetes. So this is not a this isn't a Terraform tool or anything like that. Not that it really matters.
What was it? What was it called? So I can bring up the webpage while.
Oh, it's called Pixie. And I think if you just Google like Pixie Kubernetes or yeah, something like that, it should come right up. Yeah, there you go. So basically the gist here is that you install something local and then you use that to bootstrap their little not an agent, but just a little utility that runs as a container. And so the whole resource runs as containers and other related, basic kind of Kubernetes objects in their own namespace. And the idea is that, and so if you just stay on that picture right there, Eric. So the idea is that they've written so they use eBPF, which is has been all the rage for deeper network debugging now for a decade, I guess. It has really picked up steam in the last 5 years because of how Netflix uses it. And so they do a bunch of eBPF boilerplate kernel and TCP stack debugging for you. They set all of this up in like boilerplate scripts that the utility that they've containerized that runs in the Pixie namespace on your cluster executes. It then takes all of this debugging and they have a whole bunch of different scripts. There's like 100 that cover tons of different use cases. So the one I was looking at was just called like general cluster. So it basically gives you a observability snapshot from the kernel up all the way through the Kubernetes objects running. That gives you a snapshot of kind of, to answer this question in general, what is going on with my cluster right now? It renders it all in Go templates consumable by a browser, and then it gives you a magic URL that you hit over 443. It's super easy to use. One issue that I kind of had with it is, so if anybody listens to the Kubernetes podcast, they said that no data leaves the cluster, which, okay, I get that. But you are resolving it against, so these these Go templates that they generate for you that you then hit over their URL. I think it's happening remotely. So that the only thing I don't like, you're still displaying stuff on their end. It's just metrics, but I believe that you are displaying like, names and whatever that are only relevant to your environment on their bag. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that is how it works. But still a lot of use. Yeah. So like, exactly. You have to sign up first, Eric. So, but the point is that I checked it out. I was up and running with it in 10 minutes, literally. Like it installs it to your cluster and you get observability immediately. So
it's just such a unconventional approach. It strikes me as odd, kind of how it's been implemented. Not criticizing it per se. It's just the sales pitch that it's a bunch of scripts that you install in your Kubernetes cluster through curl bash, I think will make a lot of people feel uneasy.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I think so. Yeah, like I said, like that's kind of why I mentioned in the beginning, like it's not really. So they were actually purchased too. It's interesting. They were actually purchased too, for a fair amount of money by, I want to say New Relic. Yeah, New Relic. So New Relic actually bought them. And that's why I kind of started out saying like I'm not sure if they're really productionized, but
Gee whiz, 150 million.
for some scripts, bud. So I'm in the wrong line of work, but I told you, man. But it's really easy to use, right? It's just so easy. So I know for myself, when I started out working with Kubernetes, it was one thing to stand up like a little kind cluster locally, but actually getting some level of functional observability into my clusters was like a whole different ballgame. Now, granted, in the years that have transpired, tools, a number of tools have come into this space. In fact, another tool, if you haven't checked out Infra for Mac OS, it's expensive, but it just hooks into your kube config and your kube context and just gives you, it's kind of like the same thing, but it all runs locally. You might have to search for Kubernetes. You might have to search for Kubernetes. This tool I highly recommend for Kubernetes debugging. It's very powerful. It doesn't have
This
a
is
ton
like a
of
Lens alternative.
I don't know. I've never used Lens, but it is
Okay.
expensive, which that's why I don't like use it. It's expensive to use in the enterprise. So and like you can see, it's ongoing for $100 a year. I mean, that's like too much. But even that is a lot. But anyway, I highly recommend this too. But whoa, I said too much. Check out Pixie though if you're interested.
Yeah, I'll also share a link to that Lens app, which is free. That they were trying to build a business around it, but that didn't work, and they decided just to open source the whole thing. Looks kind of similar.
I'm sure it is. I check out so many new tools. I feel like I could probably have a little side spot, like the Jonas corner.
Yeah.
In office hours where it's just me.
I would love that. I love that. I always love being aware of new tools that come out there. I don't have tools fatigue. I know some people talk about that, but I don't.
No, never tools fatigue. Yep. Okay. But I am in the middle of crafting up a spicy question here, so I need 5 minutes, and I will have something I think pretty substantive.
Okay, cool. Well, that was the list of announcements I had. Any other announcements? Any other cool tools, news, things in the community?
I posted. Go ahead,
Okay, Pepe,
Andrew.
you go first,
Okay.
then Andrew.
Well, I posted something about this Hubot. That was in our internal channel, Eric. And
I didn't see that.
It's like
what was that?
It's called AB.bot.
AB.bot?
So yeah, AB.bot is basically two developers of GitHub that work on Hubot created this tool, which basically Hubot is as a SaaS product with better or easier to manage, I guess. And they've posted in a Slack overflow. I will post it here in the chat. Pretty interesting discussion about chat ops and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like a better Hubot that's not super complicated. Pretty interesting.
But this one is now SaaS based as opposed to
being,
okay.
That's right. And one of the pain points of Hubot was how to set it up, coffee script, and all that. But they support Python, and they are going to implement more languages so you can create your own skills and stuff like that. So yeah,
cool. I'll have to check that out. Maybe have some more. Has anybody else checked out Abbot?
Nope.
There you go, Jonas. Add that to your list.
Done. Yeah.
We want a review for next week, please.
Exactly.
Oh,
Live demo.
I don't have time for that.
All right, so we did have a few questions that came up in the Office Hours channel. I don't have answers for all of them, so I thought I would open it up to the floor. First one is, has anyone test run opstrace as an alternative to other SaaS offerings? If so, how did it go? And did it go all the way into production? Asks Oscar. Anyone kick the tires on opstrace or using it in production? No. All right. I realized, Andrew Roth, I forgot you had an announcement to make.
Oh, I just wanted to circle back and comment on the Hashimoto going down to individual contributor. And
Oh yeah.
that strikes home for me because I'm they made me the product owner of this product, and it's almost completely non-technical, and
Yeah.
I feel like I kind of feel like when I go to them and say, okay, I'm ready to go back to being, a software engineer again, they're going to go, well, that's a step down for you. Well, it doesn't have to be,
Yeah.
So I like that that's happening, and want to see more of it.
Yeah, what it represents is cool. All right, so sorry about that, Oscar. Doesn't look like we have any more for opstrace. So then Thane posts a question asking, he's going to start putting his TF safe files in S3. What's the best policy to be as safe as possible? Because Terraform hasn't really given us anything to help with secrets management in TF state. So, I mean, a few thoughts on this. Yeah, so one of the challenges working with Terraform is the state backend. It's one of the things that makes Terraform cumbersome to newcomers because you really can't safely start using Terraform until you have a state backend. So HashiCorp came out with Terraform Cloud, and Terraform Cloud offers free managed backends. So, that's one option to throw out there. What I don't like about it is that it's kind of opaque, and you don't have full control over that backend. Plus, the access controls under HashiCorp Cloud are a little bit limited. So I think it was a strategic and smart move by Terraform to do that, or HashiCorp to do that. But we at Cloud Posse still to this day use S3. So the question is, these Terraform state files in the backends, how to best manage those? So there's a couple options to get started. First, on how you're going to manage that. For those people using TerraGrunt, TerraGrunt automatically creates a state backend for you in S3 according to some best practices, which is kind of cool. I always thought that was a little bit awkward. Like, hey, we have Terraform and we're using Terraform to manage our infrastructure as code. So why can't we manage our backend with Terraform? So the truth is, it is possible, and we do this everywhere. So we use our Cloud Posse AWS TF state backend module to manage the Terraform state backend according to best practices. It has tons of feature flags. It even supports like multi-region replication of your state backend files for a DR perspective. So you're not going to get that when you just use some simple backend that you manually created. So the other thing to think about then is, like, as we all know, Terraform state will likely contain some sensitive values or secrets, especially if you're provisioning RDS databases and you need to provision some master credentials there, or you're creating maybe a EC2 instance with a AWS key pair and that you generated with Terraform. Now that private key pair is in your TF state. A couple thoughts on this. One is, yeah, it sucks. Like, why does Terraform do this? Why are the secrets in the state backend? Well, the reason is it needs to know when there's a difference, so it needs to be able to calculate that difference. Some things can be used to mitigate this. You can have, you can declare your variables as sensitive, and then I believe the sensitive, any variable tainted as sensitive won't be persisted directly in the Terraform state, is my understanding. So you'll need to then always have that available. The other is that we shouldn't be exposing developers directly to the Terraform tool itself, with exception for maybe dev or sandbox environments. So anything beyond dev or sandbox should just be managed through automation and continuous delivery or continuous integration tools. That provides a one additional layer of security in between Terraform state and the secrets therein. The secrets, when you're deploying this Terraform state backend, it goes without saying that it's going to be an encrypted S3 bucket. It's going to have mandatory TLS requests to post. It's going to be a private bucket in AWS. And these are all policies enforced automatically. For example, if you're using the Cloud Posse TF state backend module. The other question is more specifically related to the architecture piece. And there's a bunch of options there. So Thane was specifically asking kind of, how do we help with managing these secrets? And with the security, it's always introducing multiple layers. There's no such thing as absolute security. So historically, for example, at Cloud Posse, one of the things we would do is we would provision different state backends per AWS account. What I didn't like about that was it really was an impedance to GitOps and automation to getting that new backend configured. So I've made the trade-off that we pretty much provision a single Terraform state backend in a single account, the top level account. And then we use the paths within the S3 bucket with IAM policies to restrict who can access what paths therein. I find it as a practical compromise as good as any of the other approaches. Now I'll turn it over. Andrew, any thoughts on this? Jonas, any thoughts on this? Pepe?
No, we use the exact same practice. My team tends to use multiple buckets, but it's mostly just for convenience.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing much to do about it. I mean, separation, sure, for environments and stuff like that, but until there is a real solution from building in Terraform, which will secure every secret, but then the definition of secret has to be flexible enough that someone can actually say, oh, this is a secret. Now, please, can you secure it? And it's just never going to be like that. So I think that the state is always going to be a secret in itself. That's how I treat it. So.
Yeah, treat it sensitive. Treat it as though it could always possibly contain secrets.
Mm-hmm.
I think that about wraps it up. Thane, are you on the call today or?
Yeah, I sure am. I really appreciate your guys' input.
Anything else we could clarify or that you want to clarify?
No, you took great care of it. Thank you.
All right, awesome.
I was owned.
Go on.
Oh, sorry. One thing I wanted to ask, I had just posted in the Office Hours channel, because I think I'm managing my state pretty well, pretty much the same way you guys described. As far as secrets go, try to keep secrets outside of the Terraform state if at all possible. But one thing I'm getting into now, actually just yesterday, is trying to manage users and their AWS access keys. And by users, I'm just talking about service accounts, basically. Some account that's programmatic, it doesn't access the console. I just need to create an access key and then rotate the keys for it. And I saw that there's a way to encrypt that secret, because if you use the module, your access key ID and secret key are going to be directly in the state. And so there is this option to encrypt it with PGP, and then you can run Terraform output and pipe that to PGP command to decrypt it. And I'm just wondering if anybody had used this approach.
We used the approach with creating IAM users back in the day, and we would use sign it with the users PGP via Keybase. I thought it was pretty amazing at the time. Now I just find it a nuisance when you start using, as we've moved on to AWS SSO. The only other augmentation to that I would add is you could, instead of outputting them in Terraform as a Terraform output, you can also stick them in SSM and then transfer that to whatever process you have for working with SSM.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see here. I think we had one more question before we get to yours, Jonas. I think it'll be a quick one. Majin was asking, how do you use pre-commit hooks for identifying secrets at what I presume is a GitHub organization level? I don't think there's a way to enforce it at a GitHub organization level, and pre-commit hooks are just at a repo level, and pre-commits are just, you know, advisory. It's only, they only kick off even for people who are have the pre-commit hooks enabled. So it is just like we were talking about security previously, it's just one more thing you can do to make you a little bit more secure or feel a little bit more protected. There's also, didn't GitHub just release some functionality where they're continuously looking for exposed secrets and source control? That's a feature flag I think you can enable per repo. And then there's also GitHub Actions. Now, some might argue, well, that's too late. It's already been committed. Well, yeah, it's already been committed, but at least you're notified of it. You can block the PR from being merged, and you can then forcefully, you know, rotate those secrets and ensure that it doesn't go forward. So I kind of like, rather than using pre-commit hooks, I personally like using the GitHub Action approach to ensure that they aren't exposed. Anyone else?
If you're using GitLab, if you're using, I think it's the premium, which is the first paid tier, you can set organizational push rules that can look for secrets, and you can enforce them. You can say, sorry, if it doesn't pass the push rule, you can't push, and it can be system wide.
And that push rule executes before the commit is written to the tree on GitLab. So it's rejecting the commit before even proceeding.
That's correct.
That's cool. That's cool.
I mean, there is, I don't know if I'm like saying something obvious here, but I mean, there is a tool from AWS Labs called Git Secrets. It seems to be, I've never heard of it. It seems to be like this exact use case.
Yeah, no, there's definitely
Sheldon.
many of them, but yeah. Hey, Sheldon, go ahead.
Yeah, I've used that. I've used a combination. I posted in the office hours and Slack. I've used Git leaks as much as I hate the TOML configuration file, that it gets kind of tricky to work with because it's been the most robust. I included Git Squealer in there, which I found to be a nice little side project somebody built that is also good. And then Git Secrets, you can layer all of these on. Like Git Secrets is one that can be global, and it does basic checking for like AWS keys and some stuff. It's not as extensive, but it's if you set that up as like a new developer, it will be almost like a global hook that can just check for stuff like AWS secrets and some basic stuff.
Yeah. But yeah, I really like so all these tools sound great, especially if you combine those with what GitLab had, which was one of those push rules. That sounds really cool. I have a little bit of FOMO there that we don't have that on GitHub.
The problem with the pre-commit and Git secrets and whatever else is, it's in their README here that I just read. You're not done yet. You must install the Git hooks for every repo that you wish to use with Git secrets -- install. And that's with, if it's done locally, like there's a step you got to do. So if you're looking for compliance and organizational level stuff, you got to look up at the system level.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thanks, Sheldon, for sharing those. Majin, are you on the call? Does that help with your question? All right, well, you're up, Jonas. Let's see, you wrote a lot here. Let's see here. So how are people terraforming alerts, specifically in the case where there are many identical underlying resources spread across numerous accounts or environments that require different threshold values? So to articulate a bit more, imagine you have 20 EKS clusters and you want to monitor something like host.io that is going to vary environment to environment that you can't just set defaults for. How are you handling that in this case? My approach is as follows, but I'd love to learn something better or other alternatives. Have a directory with YAML files, each containing a single alert. In each alert file, have some non-environment specific values like a query, which will always be the same cluster to cluster. Have an options section, which basically, or unfortunately, contains all the environmental specification, mainly like the threshold values for every environment. Loop through all those values and all the files using a Terraform file set, YAML encode every file and put the file of the alert in a local TF object. Add the non-environment specific options to a list, get all the environment specific stuff. I think, I guess the gist of it is you're doing parameterization or templating of YAML alerts in order to do this. So yeah, so let's see, someone else, Oscar, says, looks sane to me. Anything specific that bugs you here? So yeah, what I mean, I guess what would be your ideal way of doing this, Jonas? Or what is the specific rub?
I mean, I came up against this trying to use the Cloud Posse Datadog monitor module, yeah. And in this case, surprisingly, isn't handled there. And so, you know, the reason that I asked the question is because I just wanted to have some, let's see, what's the word? Prudence, I guess. Anytime that I find myself writing, you know, or on the precipice of writing like potentially hundreds of similar resources, you know, obviously I want to stop and say, wait a second, is this about to become a huge waste of time? I can't really see any other way to do it because, like I said, the values do need to differ. So, you know, it got me wondering, I don't know, it just basically, I spoke to, you know, another DevOps engineer on my team, and he was kind of like, yeah, you know, orchestrated alerting is sort of tough in that regard if you actually want to do it with any type of, you know, surgical precision. And also, it just struck me as a good kind of, I don't know what use case / question for office hours. So I figured I'd comment if anybody had any brilliant.
So yeah, I mean, I mean, I'm going to be biased, of course, and say, you know, I was kind of one of the architects behind this module, and I'm not going to dispute necessarily what you say at all. I'll just spin kind of how we were thinking about it and contrasting that to some of the other Datadog modules that I've seen out there. For example, it doesn't have to be Datadog, any other system. So if we look at many of the Datadog modules, they will create like a module per alert and then parameterize it, which I found was just very tedious to define that much boilerplate for everything you wanted to monitor. But
are you talking about a Terraform module?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'm with you. Okay.
And I forget the company. What's interesting is I could see that module was based off of the Cloud Posse one in the early days, but we gutted it and we redid the whole thing. And my problem with that was that there's just so much that you can end up wanting to parameterize that, like, you know, this is parameterizable, this is parameterizable, all of these things are, and it's like, where do you draw that line? So in trying to create a reusable module across organizations, I was just like, not going to happen. So the approach that I'm taking now instead is this is a declarative configuration in itself. The query is the thing that mostly varies. Why don't we just copy the set of monitors for each environment and customize the actual query without having, like, this is not hard to parameterize and change the values here. So that's kind of like the approach we've taken, is to create. We don't do it per account environment. We right now we're getting away with mostly prod and non-prod, but you know,
Right.
everyone's mileage may vary. And obviously, the more granular you want to go, the more tedious it is to keep those in sync, maybe across environments.
So then, yeah, I mean, I guess it's sort of 6 in one hand, half dozen in the other, because I think what I hear you saying is, if I had a bunch of, like, I think what I hear you saying is, let's say I, you know, had a situation where I needed to monitor for something that was for identical resources in different environments with differing values, you would just make a YAML file for every alert for every environment. So you would have one called like dev host latency, and you'd have your values in there. And then you'd have another called QA host latency, and you'd have your values in there. Is that right? Is that what you?
That's the gist of what I'm suggesting.
Okay.
Or saying.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess in the end, now that I think about it, that's basically, you know, I've just done it all in one file. You know, I don't know. I guess when I was writing when I was like mocking up the YAML, an example of which I posted in the office hours chat, I was just like, you know how it is when you're like neck deep in something, you're like, yeah, that makes more sense. But actually, in retrospect, now that I hear what you're saying about just having different files, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
That would be
So
I mainly wanted to ask this, like, does anybody have like some like brilliant observation about, oh no, this is how you can like get out of having to do that 5,000 times? Because I don't really see a way myself, like how to get out of, like, if you have, it's identical resources with differing values that where I'm really rocked. Like there's in the case where it's like, yeah, I can basically have this be the same across everything. Obviously, yeah, that's trivial. You know what I mean? It's the same resources with differing values. That's where I'm like kind of up against a wall.
So you can look at this. This was the one I was thinking of. It's by Clarinet. It's called Terraform Datadog Monitors. And this was the approach we started with. And that's when I said, like, this is why we didn't invest in it. I didn't like it at all. Like, you have to have a module for every single situation that you want to monitor, and all the boilerplate that goes along with it. I guess it's nice because you can document that one monitor. It's just very, very expensive to create a new thing you want to monitor. That's why I love this YAML approach. It's so lightweight. You get 80% of the value for 20% of the effort.
Right. No, I like the YAML approach too, for sure. I'm going to keep going in that. Yeah, exactly. That seems like too much effort. So I guess they handle that where they just have a bunch of different TFRs files then effectively.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, that's in the end how you invoke it. And that's the other thing. Is like, what are you going to be calling all these variables? And you just have a variable explosion. It's like parameterizing to parameterize at that point.
Okay.
So someone else had something they were going to add.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, one of the things that I've done to sort of try and pare down the explosion of parameters is it's possible in a lot of cases to use APM to establish like a baseline for a particular parameter across a bunch of different components. And I started out by using this in the most basic case, which was just, I've got thousands of logs coming in from different directions, and each of them has its own kind of periodicity. So I wanted to create a baseline for each component that told me when I was in an anomaly. And most often that just gave me a really basic sort of detection for, for when logs were offline and they shouldn't be. Like, a particular ingestion. Right.
So I think the question here is more about like, okay, so he has that, he knows how they vary.
Yeah, I have the statistics. I have the statistics. Now I need to actually alert on them, and they're all differing.
So that was kind of where I started with that, was, just using APM just to establish the baseline. But as I started to explore it a little bit further, I realized that there are particular areas, not every area, but there are other areas where you can establish other kind of baselines on top of your baseline. Like, for instance, if you've got logs that are coming in that have a particular, select insert ratio or something like that, which turns out to be a big indicator of a particular type of problem that I happen to have a lot.
Yeah.
So you can build that on top of the ingestion and say, okay, well, that ratio may be different across a bunch of different databases, but when it changes, it actually
Yes.
is something that's worth.
So you want to look at like the derivatives of the metrics, or like the ratios in this case, or the rate at which, in other words, the rate of which things are a problem. And those rates should be problems in multiple environments. So maybe there's another dimension to look at, Jonas.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, I'll ping you, Mark, because I think you're like a step ahead of me in that, everything I'm interested in right now is primitive in the sense that it's like, even though they've been generated somewhat dynamically by looking at, statistics over time, they're fairly static in that I'm basically just guessing. But, what you're getting at there about this like actually effective observability, like something like Charity Majors would talk about like not just monitoring a bunch of BS, but stuff that actually indicates a real problem. It seems like you have pretty good experience there. And that's definitely already on my mind, even as I'm building out this monitoring module. I'm like, you know what, this is only going to be mediocre at best. Like I'm going to deploy all these alerts and it's going to be better than nothing, significantly better. But in the end,
Yeah.
I'm gonna like end up figuring out, and that's I'm also really starting to look at synthetics because of that. Like, it almost seems like that's more the area that is going to be more important. But anyway, I'll thanks for the feedback, and I'll ping you to chat about that more. It sounds like you have solid experience there.
I'd be happy to work on something with you.
Cool, man.
Collaboration is cool.
Cool.
Let's see here. We had some. Sorry, go on, Andrew.
It may not be relevant to your particular situation, but my big epiphany was to always start asking, do these really need to be different? Because in my line of work, I'm on a DevSecOps team that helps other teams do, their CI pipelines and stuff if they don't have the right expertise. And a lot of the time it's like, yeah, of course they do. It's like, well, do they really? Like, is it worth the extra work here to figure out all this customization, versus just having everything be the same? And some of the time they're like, yeah, it's really not.
Yeah.
So
that's
something I've always started asking now.
Yeah, that's actually a fair point too. I mean, so the specific case that like is driving this whole thing is looking at host latency as picked up by my Istio service meshes across all my clusters. And they are all different, right? And so basically it's this case of, the kind of lead envoy proxy saying, hey, this is what I'm seeing in terms of response latency across all your sidecars. And that really does differ from environment to environment. But actually, you do raise a really good point, because how many environments do I really need to be tripping out about? Mainly it's client, test, and prod, whereas all the other ones are like, I could almost not care if like something gets crazy in dev, you know what I mean? So that's a fair point too, actually.
Or is there some threshold, like where it just doesn't matter? Like,
right.
No human being will ever be able to tell the difference between 0.1 seconds and 0.12 seconds or whatever. Like,
right. Right. Yeah. The only thing that I think, that might not work is because, unfortunately, because like one of my, complaints about Kubernetes is like how it's great, but the layer itself, the Kubernetes layer itself starts to become a snowflake, I think, almost always. And so the problem is that, if there's anything wrong with any cluster, especially like at the host level, then I do have to know about it, even if it's dev. So that's the only thing where I'm like, yeah, I don't know though. I actually may need to be kind of more granular there, but you've given me something to think about, Andy. Thank you as well. So I appreciate it. I'm done. I took up too much time. Thank you.
That's all right. Sheldon, are you around?
I am.
Hey, Sheldon, good to talk to you. It's been a while.
Yes, sir.
So it sounds like you're in the endless chase after like the holy grail of task runners for like the last 2 years, whether it be
Yeah, well, my main question, I've actually just provided that as an example when we were talking about the initialization of like, setup. I wasn't actually proposing that everybody goes and adopts that. Yeah, I just don't use make. But the main thing that I was actually posting on, I don't know if you saw it at the end, but it was more of, the one thing that Terraform doesn't do is enforce workflow. CloudFormation provides that, right? You upload it and run it, and it's just straightforward. Terraform's this amazing tool that we have with so much flexibility, but it doesn't enforce a workflow. So the problem with like dealing with
across runs of Terraform, basically,
yes,
if you have multiple root modules and things like that.
Yes.
So and this is where like a lot of this thought process that you're going through is dependent on some of your tool choices, for better or worse, and not a criticism. And a lot of people approach Terraform as just another CLI tool for deployment. It could just be just as well be Helm that we're calling, or some other tool to update an ECS task, and that's fine. And then the next question is, well, what tool do we use to call Terraform? And that's a lot of people have settled on Terragrunt, and we have settled on just not doing it at the CLI level at all, because it's really hard to do well at the CLI level, because there's one way you got to do it, maybe for local development. There's another way you got to do it for your continuous delivery and approval processes through CI. And from past conversations, my recollection is that you're using what is it? Microsoft's DevOps platform.
Yes, Azure
DevOps. Yeah, Azure DevOps. Are you still
and,
using Azure DevOps, or?
Yes, but I've used Terraform Cloud. I redid some of this in like all of my stuff. I always try to build it where it's CLI driven, so that when I put it into the pipelines, I'm using the same calls that I can run locally. So I did that through PowerShell, but then I flipped over to Terragrunt, and I'm willing to stick with that. But long term, I know that you guys have done a lot of work with the variant stack and the workflows, and if I can define it with a way like that, I just wanted to see what you guys have been doing there.
So all this stuff moves very quickly, and we are a big proponent of variant, use variant. However, the way we have been using variant, I think we've graduated from, and that's what I want to emphasize a little bit here. So we got started, like most people, with Terraform and using make, and that is great. Make is very easy for defining build dependencies and what you're calling like a workflow, right? So build this, then do this, then do this. That's what we want. In fact, when we implemented our Atmos tool, we still have, and we'll continue to support it, we have the concept of a workflow. So like, you can define a set of Terraform plan and applies that you want to do in a certain order. All right. And if we look at Terragrunt, what is it doing? It has the same kind of concept of like, dependencies that you want to run in a certain order. The mind shift that we've done has been with the help of working with Spacelift and their approach to running Terraform. And it's been mind warping for us. So instead of thinking about a workflow that you are managing, that as a DevOps or as an engineer has to work in a certain way, think about it instead as a policy. What is your policy? When this thing changes, the policies, these other things need to change. Or when this thing changes, these other things can't change until this thing has changed successfully. And changing the thought process to doing it by a policy has proven very powerful for us to work with Terraform in a context where we run just literally, we have one customer now with almost 700 individual Terraform root modules that are managed. I think if we had to define workflows for how all that stuff goes, we'd be still chasing our tail, trying to know what order those things need to go. So with policies, what we've done and leveraging Spacelift and leveraging our kind of implementation of Spacelift. We have a Terraform module for that. What we do is we set up dependencies, and then we say you just say that I depend on one other module, and then that other module can depend on some other module, and that other module can depend on some other. And you start coming up with this directed graph of dependencies. Now, it's not truly like a DAG. It's not automatically computed the way like Terraform can do it. But I think it's the next best thing once you get your head around it. So my point is, I think that if I were you and I was chasing something new, I wouldn't chase another tool to help me write workflows. I would find a tool that helps me implement policies for this stuff instead.
So rather than focusing on like most of my tools would always be, I should be able to run almost what the CI system runs, you know, through my my task files, for example. In this case, because it won't really be something that I want individual developers to be running and deploying stuff anyway, I need to look at it from a side of like how like Spacelift has their policies and their associated triggers. Terraform Cloud has some of those. Consider not trying to localize the workflow and development. Instead, focus on it being something that's more of a managed service or managed way to handle those policies, rather than trying to reproduce a local and then remotely. Yeah,
and I can see the appeal of doing it one way versus the other. The appeal of doing this with the CLI-driven approach, and hey, it's something you can touch. It's easy for you to manipulate and make it how you want it to work. The thing that I've learned to really appreciate now with Spacelift, working with many customers on this, is the accounting aspect. So there's one thing to say you have a way to apply this stuff, but in a distributed team environment, how do you even know it was applied? You can have all the workflows you want. Maybe they didn't even apply it in 24 of your environments. They only did it in the one environment that they cared about, that they were working on. So you have this drift that happens. And that's why I really like having this layer in between developers and your infrastructure that serves as like your accounting layer of, well, what's gone in and what's gone out. In the same way that you run accounting software for a business, we need accounting software for DevOps.
That's good. I think that there's just a props too. I think Spacelift team members responded in the Terraform channel and said that as far as like the Azure repos goes and pipelines, that those were actually going to be early access release, I guess, or first release on Monday. So I'll definitely take a look at that. You made some great points about the workflow, and maybe that's the challenge is I'm bridging something that's like, it can't be isolated. It's got to be centralized. This is not somebody running a make build. This is something where we're dealing with infrastructure, and maybe that's where it doesn't fit running it in the local context. And I'm going to keep running into these challenges simply because I'm approaching it from a different angle. That's
and
good
you're looking one step ahead at a time rather than looking at the end goal of what you want to be able to achieve with it. So I don't know, I encourage you or anyone else who wants to learn more about this, definitely reach out to me and set up a time. I'll be happy to walk you through what that looks like, especially if you're open to changing maybe some ways on how you define your settings, like the stack configuration that we use. That's what's open. That's what's made all of this possible for us in how we're doing it, is because we changed how we thought about configuration. We stopped thinking about configs in files, in directory structures, and started thinking about like a declarative way of defining it in an environment in a YAML config. Any other questions?
I would just add, if you have an example, I did look at that YAML stack config maybe 6 months ago, and okay, go ahead. Sorry.
We've improved a lot on that. If you go to docs.cloudposse.com, we have a bona fide tutorial by Matt Gowie, who helped us write it, and it's a great introduction into the tooling that we have. So we have like your first environment on AWS, and we have a tutorial repo you can clone with an example stack configuration. Now, tutorials are only as advanced as we could make it without introducing too much complexity to document it. But there's then taking this into Spacelift is what's rad. So if you get that tutorial and you get that working, then you get for free Spacelift, because you can go to our Cloud Posse repo. We have our Spacelift Terraform module here, and this Terraform module understands the stack configuration and will automatically set up all of your stacks in Spacelift with the policies, and has the ability to specify policies per stack or globally. It lets you set up your dependencies, labels. You can organize your stacks into folders, all that stuff. You can get that up in a day using this module.
I'm not sure I understand.
That's really funny, Siri. All right. Any other questions on this? Under, let's see, reference stacks, and then yeah, so under reference and stacks here we have kind of an explanation, some more, including a fully annotated schema here. Cloud Posse tutorials. Okay, I'll do one more link, the tutorials themselves. All right, well, we are about out of time for today. So any last questions? Otherwise, I'll start to wrap things up here. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining and asking great questions and helping everybody out. I really like to see that. That's what we are all about. Head over to youtube.com/c/cloudposse if you want to see some of our last or past recordings, including the most recent demo we did on Waypoint. That'll be really cool. If you haven't already, go ahead, sign up for our Slack team. We got nearly 5,000 members at slack.cloudposse.com. as well as subscribe to future office hours by going to cloudposse.com/office hours. Thank you all so much. See you all same place, same time next week. Take care.